All right, Northfolk Southern Locomotive Engineering Training Handbook. Train handling. Objective. The purpose of the lesson is familiar with the locomotive engineering with the various concepts of the training handling with the Northfolk Southern. Each of the training will demonstrate the knowledge of the concept during the train similarity session. Training will include, but not limited to, starting, accelerating, cresting with the perceived with the negotiating different type of the train. Locomotive engineering training will become familiar with will be able to apply with appropriate rules and instruction found in Northfolk Southern 1 rules for equipment operation and handle of the training will also record the path for the final training operation exam, which will include the questions pertaining with the train handling method, special instruction in order to successfully complete the phase 1 of either of the training. The training must score at least 80% of the final training operation exam. Introduction. Proper train handling requires careful consideration to track of the train makeup of the terrain, locomotive, the condition of the speed. Your locomotive, the engineer should be manage the slack throughout the train to prevent damage for the landing of the equipment. You should always plan ahead of the required to regulate with the train speed below the maximum authorized speed to properly control the slack. In addition, with the planning ahead, good train handling involves anticipating unexpected events. However, the response to these events could be the difference between the keeping the key training context here, the derailment, and when they're thinking of the train handling, words such as slowly, easily, minimal, and gradual are good starting point. The locomotive axle limits under the power. When taking charge of the locomotive, consider for the engineer to determine the total numbers of power to axle, and the consider for the Northfolk Southern 1 instruction limit the number of the power to axle that can be used ahead of the train. Except for the designated train, no more than the equivalent of 24 axles may be operated under the power of the head of the train. The high adhesion axles equivalent to 1 1/3. Conventional axles, alternating current traction motors are equivalent to 1 1/2 axles. Low grain trains are not exceeding 100 cars are authorized to use 4 high adhesion 6 axles at 32 powered axles online. When using the maximum number of powered axles, the throttle should be increased gradually to avoid the deployment of the extra excessive track after at a low speed. Extreme care must be exercised when starting to preventing the separation and derailment. Locomotive axle limits for the dynamic braking. In addition, to determine the total number of the powered axle of the locomotive, for the engineer must ensure that the total number of the dynamic braking axles does not exceed the Northfolk Southern 1 instruction below the Northfolk Southern 1 instruction equal to the dynamic braking axles at the head of the train. If the locomotive consists of one or more of the units equipped with the same dynamic brakes no more than the equivalent of 20 axles for the dynamic braking may be used on the head end of the train. If all units consist of equipped with extended range dynamic brake no more than the equivalent of 18 axles for the dynamic brake may be used on the head of the train. Exemptions. If all units consist of equipped with extended range dynamic brake for the equivalent of 20 axles may be used with the training holding solid bulk commodities such as coal, rain, parts, potash, phosphate, or similar bulk landing. The equivalent of 24 axles dynamic brake may be used to designate the train's handling on the load of the 100-ton cars equipped with a high tension grade E knuckle or couplers. Except for the designated of the train, the dynamic brake must be cut out in all axes of the 18 axles. Starting a train. How you start the train will depend largely on what type of the grade there is the train is on. When it's starting on the level of the grade, the brake should be fully released. One of the brakes at the relief on the throttle 1 notch at a time, giving each of the throttle notch time to become effective. The locomotive usually start moving the throttle position number 1 or number 2, depending on whether the slack is bunched or stretched. Once, if the locomotive is starting moving to keep just enough power to apply with the move of the locomotive. Slowly, evenly watch the ground and the ammeter when starting. If the locomotive moves out of too fast, reduce the throttles or take power away. Avoid the high ampere. Only slack is completely stretched. The train should be normally required no more than number 2 or number 3 position to begin moving. Starting a train on the ascending grade but requires a different approach with the power should be applied with the brakes, the release of the stretch, any slack that may be bunched. Starting a heavy train on the ascending grade may require the throttle to notch forward the starting of the train, moving to avoid the rolling backwards, and however the greater care should be taken to avoid wheel slips which could break the train into, causing the rail burns. Carefully, attention must be aimed at the time throttle position above the notch 3 is needed to start the train. Things you should consider experience the difference with difficulty while starting. Brakes fully release adequate locomotive power for the train tonnage for the type of the locomotive train. Locomotive for the heavy grade, the turnout and cross over the curve of the danger over the string line after the emergency brake application or car is derailed. Note, when starting the continued application of the power when the locomotive is not moving, then can result with the damage of the traction motor from the burns on the communicator. Starting in the terrain of the descending grade requires yet another approach. In a situation, even the engine brake is applicable when starting the train at a descending grade. Locomotive brake cylinder pressure should be reduced gradually to prevent the head end of the from stretching too quickly, and enough of the brake of the cylinder pressure should be maintained to prevent the heavy run out, which will allow allowing the weight of the locomotive to being stretched and the train. Continuing reducing the brake cylinder pressure until all the slack is stretched and the entire train is moving downward at the grade, at which time the independent brake should be fully released. Alright, starting a train with the AC traction. When starting the train with the AC traction locomotive, the SD80 Mac on low level of the descending grade, the same procedure with the DC traction locomotive. However, starting on the ascending grade will somewhat be different. The AC traction motor allows the throttle to be advanced to start the train with the brakes applied. Because the AC traction motor do have the communicating brushes, therefore they are not susceptible to damage with a high current level while the locomotive is not moving. When starting a train on the ascending grade, you must apply with sufficient tractive effort to move the train before they release the independent brake. If you fail to do this, the train roll backwards, the locomotive will go in the full dynamic braking at 2.5 miles an hour. You will have to stop and begin the starting procedure again. Another important feature of the AC traction is the tremendous starting with the capability of the because of the computer-controlled wheel slip. Until they become familiar with these locomotives, you may be tempted to reduce the power of the starting under the extreme starting conditions because the locomotive may shake and vibrate at the computer-adjusted current level of the traction motor. The normal because of the advanced wheel slip and the throttle should not be reduced unless you receive the continuous wheel slip light using the same procedure to accelerate with a DC traction locomotive. If there are any type of locomotive, the AC or DC traction motor, after the entire train is moving, allow the train time to adjust the amperage level off and begin with a decrease as the train accelerates, using sand only when necessary. Accelerating the train. After the train is moving, it can be accelerated accomplished by the advancing of the throttle, observing the speed indicator, rate of acceleration, ammeter of the ammeter will level off, beginning to drop as the train accelerates. When this happens, advance the throttle 1 notch. This will increase the current with the traction motor. The ammeter will start to rise and speed will increase. As the speed increases, the ammeter again will level off, start falling. When this happens, the throttle can be advanced another notch. This produces the repeated until the desired speed is reached. Do not force the throttle and advance too quickly, as it could result in the wheel slip of the broken knuckles or coupler. Throttle modulation. Most locomotives using the freight surface are equipped with dynamic brakes. However, there are many times that you will have to operate with the train without the benefit of the dynamic brakes. In some situations, the throttle can be used to control the train speed. On a level grade, when the train reaches the desired speed, the throttle can be reduced to provide just enough power to maintain the speed. When operating and undulating the rip-rap terrain, your goal is to keep the locomotive in the rear of the train, moving as close to the same speed as possible, which will keep the slack of the force of the minimum. When the locomotive starts uphill, they will tend to slow down. What happens with the advanced throttle to keep the speed constant when the locomotive starting downgrade, reduce the throttle to keep the head of the train from accelerating too quickly. Give the train time to adjust the power chain, but reducing the throttle too quickly can result with the unnecessary slack action. Allow the part of the train to go upgrade to keep the speed constant, slightly reduce the speed of the open. The throttle is needed to hold the train speed constant. Allow each notch to become effective before adding another throttle notch. Controlling slacking. Several factors are involved with the controlling slack on the train depending on the location of the different techniques that are required. Here we'll discuss a few general train handling techniques. As the engineer, you must know the length of the train. The Northfolk Southern 1 Rule 829 states, an electronic record told the weight of the length of the train will be maintained in the control locomotive. With one way to determine the train length is not provided by the using of the wayside detector. Do this stay of the distance counter with the locomotive passes. The detector stops the counter when the detector sounds off. When the wayside the detector generally sounds 20 cars for length after the rear car path. The detector deducting 20 car length from the distance counter reading will give the approximate length of the train. The slack of the rear of the train will run in or out near the same location regardless of the length of the train. Slack cannot be run out or can be cushioned. The faster the speed, harder the run in or run out. The slack usually works out of the different train when the rear is starting up the grade. If possible, operate your train so that you can advance the throttle just before the slack becomes and slightly reduce the dynamic braking amperage of the braking. This will cushion the slack. The good rule of thumb to the follow the locomotive in a position that you can increase the speed when the slack is being stretched. Notch off the throttle and increase the dynamic brake. If the locomotive is on a ascending grade when the slack is about to stretch out, they will be decreasing speed with no action is necessary. Any portion of the railroad where the slack action is problem can usually be handled by the slowing down, drifting a train. By drifting, we mean the locomotive is in idle or a low throttle position while descending with long grades that are not too steep and on the level of the grade when they're running near the maximum authorized speed. The drifting is not recommended undulating territory, allowing the slack to intermediately run in and out. Your goal as locomotive engineers to manage slack, not to let the slack manage you. When drifting in an undulating territory, the train is controlling you, and the situation should be avoided. Cresting grades. When the locomotive consists of the crest and with the summit, that must be reduced to maintain the safe of the level of the draft and force of the coupler of the crest for the grade, especially with important low speed over the hard pole. The further reductions must be made to keep the speed constant until the 50% of the train is over the crest. If the dynamic brake will be the descending grade, to shut off the power and wait for the prescribed time, the minimum of 10 seconds before setting up the dynamic brake. Gradually apply the dynamic brake to the bunch to slack. Keep the speed constant until the 2/3 of the train is over the crest. When the dynamic brake is not sufficient to control the speed. When dynamic brake is pushed by the brake with the control of the train speed, it must be applied with a sufficient distance to ensure the slowing with the desired speed. If necessary, the dynamic brake is not sufficient to control the speed of the train. Air brake may be used together with the dynamic brake. With the dynamic brake fully applied, with making the minimum reduction, the automatic brake application, given the application time of the become effective, additional reductions of 2-3 pounds should be made as needed to control the speed. If possible, the total reduction should always be at least 10 pounds. So they activate the accelerated release feature of the freight car control valves. When using the automatic train air brake along with the dynamic brake, the independent brake valve must be bailed off to press in a release position held in this position for 4 seconds per unit with the consist until the brake pipe exhaust ceases. This must be done to ensure the locomotive brakes do not apply with an event of the dynamic brake interlocking failure. There is a locomotive that consists not equipped with the dynamic brakes. When making a running release over the train air brake, the dynamic brake must be kept fully and applied with maximum amperage until the air brakes have released throughout the train. Releasing the dynamic brake. The dynamic brake must not be released with undulating the riprap terrain. Example of the would be the part of the train going uphill and the locomotive going downhill. This would cause a severe run out with a possibility causing the train separation. The dynamic brake must not be released if the train is descending with a heavy grade. Pick a spot at the bottom of the grade where the locomotive has started to upgrade. The dynamic brake may be released when the train is on level ground again, where the engineer should pick the place where the track turns upgraded in a curve where the locomotive is binding to prevent the head end from running out. And the train speed of the terrain in a slack condition will determine how much of the power is applied after releasing the dynamic brake. An emergency brake application. When the speed of the train cannot be controlled properly with the use of the dynamic brake and the service brake application, an emergency brake application must be initiated without hesitation. Notion: any train with a descending of the grade of 1% of the grader over the distance of 3 continuous miles must be immediately brought to stop by an emergency brake application, if necessary, when the movement exceeds the maximum authorized speed at a location by more than 5 miles an hour. If the emergency brake application is initiated with the automatic brake valve, the emergency brake valve, and the locomotive, the cab, the two-way of the end of the train device, if so equipped, will activate it with the initiate of the emergency brake application from the rear. The automatic brake valve handle must be left in the emergency position until after the train is stopped. Other emergency brake applications: if the emergency brake application initiated from the rear of the train, the pusher surface of the caboose, when communication is available, the engineer of the controlling locomotive must immediately play for the automatic brake valve in the emergency position. If the positive control switch activates following the undesired emergency application, the automatic brake valve must be played for the emergency position left there until the train stops. 9. Emergency brake application while the train is in power. If the emergency brake application occurs while in the power of the slack of the chassis, the independent brake must be bailed off immediately with the release position to prevent undesired slack at the run-in with the possible ejecting of the train. The emergency application begins to slow the train. The throttle must be dropped at the rate that will allow the train to remain stretched but not cover the excessive stretches on the knuckles and jaw heads. The throttle will continue to reduce until the positive control switch is activated with about 20 seconds after the time of the engine speed. With the drop of the idle with the emergency drop the idle and the amperage with the drop 0 with the emergency application initiated with the automatic brake valve and desired. The positive control switch activates immediately. The independent brake must be bailed off until the train has come to the complete stop. The independent brake application on the top of the emergency application would cause the brake cylinder pressure to build up higher than some of the units in 90 pounds or more, which would cover the wheels to lock and slide. Once the train stops full apply the independent. Alright, emergency brake application while the dynamic brake air when the slack is bunched. An emergency brake application, either desired or undesired, occurs while in the dynamic brake and the slack is bunched. The Northfolk Southern locomotives will continue to load even after the APC switch activates. This allows the dynamic braking effort throughout the stop. When the train slows to the point where the dynamic brake are no longer effective, the independent brake should be applied at the level with to prevent the run out with a continuing bailing off of the release position. This will occur at different speeds depending on the type of the dynamic brakes. Note: a running or release must not be made after an emergency brake application. 10. Air brakes. Even the heavy descending grade when the train has stopped, the train air brakes will be required to safely control the movement. When the train has stopped by either emergency brake application, the brake pipe reduction 25 psi more than another brake application will be required as the grade in the setting of the following steps must be made to follow to ensure the proper charging of the train line system. Apply sufficient hand brakes to secure the train. Release the air brakes, charging the air brake system within 15 psi of the heat the valve setting, and then wait 10 minutes before proceeding. Hand brakes may be remain applied until the train safely descends to the grade. Existing rules governing the inspection of the trains after the emergency brake application will apply when trains have at the top of the remove of the pushers, locomotive, the drape, and the whole of the train with an independent brake as possible. 2. To keep the brake system fully charged. If the train is not trapped, held the brake system is not kept fully charged with the remove of the pusher locomotives at the bottom of the grade. Note: do not remove the pusher locomotives on the grade unless the brake system remains fully charged. Alright, braking against power. The dynamic brake is first priority with the controlling train speed. On the trains where we do not have the dynamic brakes, we cannot control the train speed by throttle throttle modulation if you're drifting when you use the train air brakes. When stretching braking, you should start enough with the advanced light, so light reductions can be made with the control speed. Start with the braking and making a minimum reduction within the automatic brake. With the reduction will result in a 6 to 8 pound drop of the brake with a pipe pressure with about 10 pounds of the brake pipe pressure through the train. When the brake becomes effective within the train, reduce the throttle gradually to keep the train stretched and keep the stress of the couplers at a safe level. Additional reductions of the 2 to 3 pounds may be made as needed, reducing the throttle accordingly. Watch the ammeter, allow the amperage to increase slightly while the braking power against the power will keep slack stretch. By the high amperage can result with the train separation. If possible, total the reduction should always be at least 10 pounds. To activate the accelerated release feature with the brake car control valve, if running with the release of the gradually reduce the throttle after placing the automatic brake pedal handle in the release position to reduce the stress of the knuckles and couplers. When the train brakes are reapplied after the running of the release before the brake with the system is fully recharged, the brake pipe reduction must be at least 5 psi greater than the use of the last brake application to ensure that the brakes reapply. Exemption when using 100% retainers. Stopping when the dynamic brakes are not available. When stopping the dynamic brake is not available, the same procedure as slowing with making an additional reduction with the 2 or 3 pound for the complete the stop just prior to the stop, reducing the throttle with the idle. Keeping an independent brake depressed with the bail off the 4 seconds per unit with as long as the brake pipe is exhausting. The train pipe should apply with emergency while the braking against the power of the train. Stretched independent brake must be kept bailed off until the stop to keep the train stretched, allowing the locomotive brake to apply under these conditions could go with the train to jackknife. Alright, stopping on ascending grade. Air brakes can and should be needed to properly control the speed and stop of the train. However, at the time of the automatic brake is applied, but there is always a chance of an emergency brake application may occur. If stopping the ascending grade, the planning for the enough to advance, you may be able to stop reducing the throttle, allowing the train to stall on the grade. You would apply the automatic brake valve just as complete to stop the preventing of the rolling backwards and to comply with the Northfolk Southern Rule 1A31, ensuring the train line continuity. Alright, 12. Unused independent brake and automatic brake. The locomotive may be allowed to apply with a safe level of the automatic brake application when there are more locomotives than the cars in the train. A very short train, all slowing and stopping, the independent brake is to be bailed off during the automatic brake applications on all other trains. For instance, there are many times the locomotive brakes are needed for the proper train handling. For instance, for the more locomotive units for the cars, more weight of the locomotive than the train. Under the conditions, we may allow the locomotive brakes to apply along with the train add brakes. The normal situation would be to keep the locomotive brake bailed off of the independent while making the train air brake applications, running and release of the train air brakes. Never release the brakes while the automatic brake valve is exhausting. This means the application is not completely throughout the train and could cause sticking of the brakes. This applies with all trains. The automatic brake is played for the release position, reduce the throttle further for the lower stress of the couplers while brakes are releasing. The train air brakes are applied serially from the front of the train to the rear, released in the same manner. To keep it the same with power applied with the brakes releasing on the head end, while the brakes are still applied with the rear, it could result in the pulling of the train in two. Well, when reapplying the power, always make sure the brakes are released before advancing the throttle. This can be done by monitoring the flow meter on the locomotive unit so equipped. Running release must not be made with any slack punch unless the maximum dynamic brake amperage is in use. A running release must not be made after the emergency brake application is desired on zero. The automatic brake must be placed for the emergency position as soon as the power control switch is activated. The left there until the train stops, except for the radio train. For the handle for the automatic brake will be left pinned in the release position. The following instructions in the 15 psi less reduction do not apply when the cresting of the descending of the heavy grades disturbed power trains or to trains with 74 cars, 3,700 feet or less. No, a heavy descending grade is defined as descending grade of 1% or more. If and out without the graded braking requirements, consult the division road and foreman for the engines. Trains over 125 cars or 6,250 feet. Anytime the train air brake is applied on the train with more than 125 cars over 6,250 feet, the train must be brought to a stop before releasing the train air brakes. 101 cars to 125 cars with a dynamic braking of 5,150 feet to 6,250 feet. The air brake may be released on the trains of 101 cars to 120 cars of 5,050 feet to 6,025 feet without stopping the dynamic brakes or being used. The brake pipe reduction does not exceed 15 pounds with a speed of 35 miles an hour more at the time of release. 16, 101 cars to 125 cars without the dynamic brakes of 5,050 feet to 6,250 feet. When the train air brakes are applied with the train with 101 cars to 125 cars, the dynamic brakes are not in use. The train will be brought to stop before the releasing of the brakes. 75 to 100 cars, a running brake release may be made with the train with 75 to 100 cars, 3,070 feet to 5,000 feet when the brake pipe reduction does not exceed 15 pounds and speed of 30 miles an hour and more at the time of the release. Alright, proper use of the independent brake. The independent brake may be used with the following using any form of switching surface, whether the brake pipe is coupled or not, when operating a light engine for the starting of the train, descending of the grades in emergency. Using an independent and dynamic brake, under no circumstance for the independent engine brake with the dynamic brake be used together before when using the automatic brake when the dynamic bailing off the independent brake frequently in the release position. Ensure the locomotive brakes do not apply. Any locomotive brake cylinder pressure develops while in the dynamic brake can cover the sliding with the wheels. Locomotive consistent with the 6 or more axles extended the range of the dynamic brake. When using the dynamic brake to make the end plan with the stop of the locomotive consistent with the 6 or more axles extended range dynamic brake with the independent brake may be used to complete the stop without using the automatic brake provided there are no more than 20 axle locomotive consist, including the unit in tow. Under the following conditions, speed is decreased for the 3 miles an hour lift. The dynamic brake fully applied as black is bunched throughout the train. With the train will be kept slack bunched after the stop is completed. 6. The dynamic brake is released. Independent brake is applied and simultaneously. D. The stop is not to be used made with the train and turnout or crossover. This does not does not apply with a solid loaded block of commodity train. A locomotive consistent equipped with less than 6 axles extended with the range of the dynamic brake and with a consistent not equipped with extended range dynamic brake. When using the dynamic brake to play with the stop of the locomotive consistent equipped with less than 6 axles extended range dynamic braking, when this is not equipped with extended range dynamic braking, the independent brake may be used to complete the stop without using the automatic brake valve or brake, provided there are not more than 20 axle locomotive consistent, including used in tow under the following conditions. Speed decreased to 10 miles an hour, less than the dynamic fully applied. Slack is bunched throughout the train. The terrain will be kept slack bunched after the stop is completed. Dynamic brake is released. Independent brake is applied simultaneously. And these do not apply with a solid bulk commodity train. Stop is not being made with a train of the turnout or crossover. The train is not within the limits of the terminal except on the main track. Alright, backup movements. Prior to the backup movement, the consideration must be given the tonnage, strength, and length of the position of heavy light in the car's grade condition, with the track curvature of the terminal type, the unit, the number of the units over the consist of the train air brakes to be fully released before applying the maximum power. Amperage should be lifted and limited to the safe level throughout the movement. No more than equivalent 16 powered axles as referenced in the Northfolk Southern Locomotive Series. The tables may be used with the make of the backup of the movement where the train track conditions indicate the high risk for jackknifing, rail turnover, and pushing of the cars off the outside over the sharp curves. Back of the movement must not be made with the count line ability to start a forward movement. Shoving against the brakes. In some instances, it must be necessary to shove a cut without the train brake up and with the train brake applied. Apply power, gradually watch the ammeter to make too much pressure against the cut can cause a derailment. The cut starts moving to make the minimum reduction with the automatic brake, keeping the locomotive brake bailed off. Using enough power to maintain the speed, watching this for a sudden surge with the amperage can indicate a derailment. As the brakes become effective, the amperage will start to rise. Keep careful and watch for the amperage as much as the cars can derail the car. The excess amperage is needed to keep the cut moving, although allow the movement to stop, release the brakes, and begin the moving over the reapplying the brakes if necessary. Alright, 24. Backing up when cut is to be controlled with the independent brake. Applying the brakes too heavily with the shoving will result in a hard run out with the possibility of a broken knuckle or coupler. When starting, move the apply with the locomotive brakes very tightly with the independent brake and allow the slack to stretch to keep the locomotive brakes applied with the control speed of the cut. Keep the cut stretched until it stops. If the automatic brake is not needed to complete the stop, apply it along with the independent brake as well, bailing off the excessive pressure. Switching. The engineer is responsible for the proper handling of the stopping of the train. Always move at the speed with which it allows you to stop in the proper distance. If the cut is being handled without error, move so that the stop can be made with the locomotive brake. Judging your distance when you are to move them a certain distance, such as 10 car lengths, pick up the object on the ground so you can see how far you have to travel and how far you have to go before you stop. If switching on the grade, know that you are sufficient stopping power before moving. If the grade is too steep to the control of the cut with the locomotive brake, have the air coupled and allow the ample time to charge before moving. 28. Operating locomotives over the railroad crossing diamonds. When the locomotive is being operated with a speed greater than 25 miles an hour in dynamic braking, mechanical shock flashover, which can damage the traction and motor of the trip, the ground relay may occur with the railroad crossing. To avoid the risk, reduce the throttle to notch 4 lower at least 8 seconds before reaching the crossing. This must be handled to create a little slack action as possible. Plan your move in advance. Alright. Alright, 30. The pusher service in the shoving train. If the push too much of the pressure applied with the shoving of the train could result in the jacking of the train. On some locomotives, the delay of the dropping out with the control switch is in the case of the emergency brake application. Even though the brake handle is in the handle off position, that could result in the shoving locomotive remaining in the power and shoving through the train. Shoving locomotive is not furnished with any of the brake pipe pressure. The brake pipe pressure is controlled with the lead locomotive is necessary to ensure the instant power knockout and increase the emergency application for any sort of the give the engineer on the lead locomotive. The unit completely controlled with the train brakes. The following procedure must be observed when the pusher service is required. Alright, couple the engines to the rear of the train with the cutout cars to be pushed. Place the automatic brake valve in the handle off position. This is necessary to provide power to cut off the PC feature of the brake pipe. They initiate with the emergency out curve of the cut. The brake pipe cut out with the cutout pushers. The engine allow the train in the line to air to be controlled by the lead engine. Coupled to the train in line to open both angel cocks. With the helper locomotives that are coupled to the rear of the train, visual inspection must be made to determine the helper locomotive brakes are responding properly with a form 20 psi reduction on the controlling locomotive with more than one unit pushing the locomotive. The coupled to the rear of the train must be uncoupled. If the caboose is ahead with the pusher locomotive, the caboose must be uncocked by while pushing. When the pusher service is no longer required, the movement must be stopped before the pusher units are uncoupled, except for the automatic uncoupling devices authorized. Close both angle cocks except for the automatic uncoupling devices authorized. Cut and the double heading cock on the pusher engine for the test the independent brake valve separate from the train and the cutout over the cars being pushed. No more than the equivalent of 16 conventional powered axles may be used with the pusher service exemption. The equivalent of 24 conventional powered axles may be used with the pusher service by authorized special instruction in train pairing push the solid load block commodity train. High adhesion axles are equivalent to 1/3 conventional axles. Alternating current traction motor equipped with the axles are equivalent to 1/2 axle. Testing power knockdown feature. Locomotives must not be used with the controlling unit of the pusher consistent unless it is known to be equipped with the power knockdown feature to reduce the power of the engine speed without delay before following the emergency application of the air brakes initiated with any source of the automatic brake valve. The following test will be used to determine that the unit is equipped with the operative power down knockdown feature. Reverser must be set on a generator. Field switch must be on the open position. Up on the brake valve. The handle must be in the handle off position. Of the brake and the brake cutout must be in the out position. The one must be in advanced number 3 position. Emergency valve must be open to determine that the PC switch is activates and the engine speed is reduced. Or your helper service. And double heading service of the engineer leading the locomotive shall operate the brake. The double heading means that you have more than one locomotive that have then one of the locomotive is not equipped with the multiple unit operation. On all other locomotives in the train, the brake pipe cut out to the brake valve must be cut out. Maximum and reserve pressure maintained when the brake valve handles the kept in the handle off position. It becomes necessary for the leading locomotive to give up the control locomotive over the train. The short of the destination test of the air brakes must be made. The separately brakes of the operative with the automatic brake valve of the locomotive taking control of the control of the train. When the two locomotives consist or coupled, they must be set up for multiple unit operation when possible. L250. In the case of the emergency condition, the engineer, second one that push your locomotive will stop the train and playing with the brakes. In emergency, the emergency must have the complete understanding of the before the proceeding. Reducing tonnage when operating locomotive with the traction motor cut out with the traction motor for the locomotive unit with the cut out with any of the recent tonnage for that unit may be reduced. This applies when the rolling the grade is ahead. Usually, judge good judgment is setting out the tonnage when cutting out the traction motor, but the chief dispatcher must be notified. 31. Short time rating of the locomotive. The short time rating is reposed to the engineer stand with the animated with the gauge, but it must be violated if the train cannot be moved over the grade with exceeding with the short time rating on any of the either of the double the hill of the gauge to get the help from the pusher to next with the short time rating on units of co equipped. Observe the short time operation plate and instruct from the load meter with which of the graduated to show the time and the minutes the various loads that may be carried. Operate the low short time rating on any of the consist will govern the maximum load to be carried. Maximum continuous concurrent rating of the short time operations were developed the throttle not edge 8. The values may be decreased to the lower throttle position because of the engine speed. Consequently, the traction motor cooling air is reduced. The short time ratings are exceeded. The movement that must be stopped, reversed, or centered. Throttle advanced to the maximum number 8 for at least 10 minutes to cool the traction motors. Newer locomotives will automatically reduce the current to the traction motors to prevent overheating. Our train handling studying guide questions. Describe how you would start the train moving on level grade. At which the throttle notch would your train normally start to move? The train started. Describe how would you accelerate the train. What happened to the train handling throttle shut off too quickly? Describe how you would complete with a stop the even the independent brake valve with 6 or more axles extended range dynamic braking locomotives consist. Describe what you would do if it's shoving against the brakes you experience excessive amperage valve and what condition the dynamic brake and automatic air brake you put together. Under what condition the aerodynamic brake and the independent brake you put together. If all the locomotives are considered that are equipped with extended range dynamic brake, the same with the designated solid block commodity with the trains, how much of the equivalent dynamic brakes are allowed at the head end of the train? What should be considered if experiencing difficulty in starting a train when braking against power, when action can you take the amperage will increase if the train starting with decreased speed? When making back up the movement again for the air brakes, what could happen if you put the pressure against the cut? If the operating mixture reach your fixed strain over the 110 car for the level of the grade, can you make the running release for the air brakes without stopping? Well, dynamic brake is necessary to apply the automatic brake to control your speed. In order to make the running release for the air brakes, you must do the dynamic brake. What action would you take of the switching if you cut and cannot be handled safely without the independent brake? What crossing of the sum of the steep grade would you do with the throttle? Why? Why you for the train air brake? What do you do? Why? What must you do with the independent brake? What making the automatic brake application with the initial reduction be? How much should the total reduction be? What is permissible to do with the independent brake and starting a train when the locomotives are needed with the proper training handling? How do we apply them to allow them to apply? During undesired emergency application, how would you handle the locomotive brakes and power and dynamic brake? How would you operate the locomotive on a railroad crossing of the grade of excess of 25 miles an hour? When precautionally you're taking and shoving the train as a helper locomotive, why is it heavy grade? What is a heavy grade? What in operation training not even the dynamic brake? What is the greatest number of the cars allowed to running the least from the level of the grade? Alright, you got your notes, and then moves on to troubleshooting a diesel locomotive.